Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into a topic that's been buzzing around Europe and beyond, the proposed reforms to the European Union. Whether you're in the US, Europe or anywhere else, this is a topic that could impact us all. So let's get into it. Before jumping into the proposed reforms, let's quickly review the current state of the European Union. The EU, as it stands today, is a political and economic union of 27 member states that are located primarily in Europe. It's a unique entity with its own set of institutions like the European Commission, the European Parliament, and the European Court of Justice. Over the years, the EU has faced numerous challenges, from economic crises to political disagreements among member states. And let's not forget Brexit, the UK's dramatic exit from the EU that sent shockwaves through the continent. The EU has a rich history of evolving through treaties and reforms, adapting to new political landscapes and economic realities. From the Treaty of Rome in 1957, which established the European Economic Community, to the Maastricht Treaty in 1993, which formed the EU and introduced the euro, the Union has continually redefined itself to serve its member states and citizens better. So, why are reforms necessary? The EU is like a giant machine with many moving parts, and sometimes those parts need a bit of tweaking to keep everything running smoothly. Here are a few reasons why reforms are being considered. 1. Economic stability. The Eurozone crisis highlighted the need for stronger economic governance. Some member states struggled more than others, leading to calls for more robust economic policies. The aim is to create a more resilient economic framework that can withstand future shocks. 2. Political cohesion. There's a growing need for better political cohesion among member states. Differing national interests often lead to gridlock and slow decision-making. Enhanced political cohesion could streamline processes and make the EU more efficient and effective in addressing both internal and external challenges. 3. Global influence. In an increasingly globalized world, the EU needs to strengthen its position on the international stage. This means having a more unified foreign policy and defense strategy, ensuring that Europe can stand strong amidst global powers like the US and China. One of the main focus areas for EU reform is the economy. Here are some of the proposed changes. 1. Banking Union. There's a push for a more integrated banking system across the EU to prevent future financial crises. This would include a common deposit insurance scheme and more centralized supervision of banks. The implementation of the Basel III agreement aims to strengthen banks' resilience and reduce excessive variability in capital requirements. 2. Fiscal union. Some experts suggest that a fiscal union, where member states share a budget and fiscal policies, could help stabilize the economy. This would involve more oversight of national budgets and spending, ensuring that all member states adhere to common fiscal rules to prevent economic imbalances. 3. Green economy. The EU is also looking to lead the way in combating climate change. This includes ambitious plans for reducing carbon emissions and investing in renewable energy. The European Green Deal aims to make Europe the first climate-neutral continent by 2050, transforming the EU's economy for a sustainable future. Section 4. Political and social reforms. Economic reforms are only part of the puzzle. Here are some proposed political and social reforms. First, migration policy. The EU's migration policy has been a hot topic, especially with the recent influx of refugees. Proposed reforms include a more unified approach to asylum and migration, ensuring a fairer distribution of migrants among member states. However, these reforms have faced criticism for potentially heightening the risk of human rights violations. Next, democratic processes. To address concerns about the EU's democratic deficit, there are proposals to enhance the role of the European Parliament and increase transparency in decision-making. This includes more direct involvement of EU citizens in policy-making and efforts to make EU institutions more accountable. Lastly, social policy. The EU is also focusing on social issues like reducing inequality and improving labour rights. This includes initiatives like the European Pillar of Social Rights, which aims to ensure fair working conditions and social protection. The goal is to create a more inclusive Europe, where all citizens can enjoy a high standard of living. Section 5. Sector-specific reforms. The EU is also proposing reforms in specific sectors to address contemporary challenges. Firstly, pharmaceutical legislation. Revisions to the pharmaceutical legislation aim to ensure that all patients across the EU have timely and equitable access to safe, effective and affordable medicines. This includes measures to combat antimicrobial resistance and improve the environmental sustainability of medicines. Secondly, digital and technological advancements. The EU is working on reforms to bolster its digital economy, focusing on enhancing cybersecurity, promoting digital literacy, and ensuring data protection. The Digital Services Act and Digital Markets Act are key components of this strategy, aiming to create a safer and more competitive digital space. Lastly, environmental regulations. Beyond the Green Deal, the EU is updating its environmental regulations to address new challenges like plastic pollution, biodiversity loss, and sustainable agriculture. These reforms aim to make the EU a global leader in environmental protection and sustainability. Section 6. Potential challenges and opposition. Of course, not everyone is on board with these reforms. Here are some of the potential challenges and sources of opposition. Firstly, sovereignty concerns. Some member states are wary of losing their national sovereignty. They fear that more integration could mean less control over their own policies. This is a significant hurdle, as national governments must balance domestic interests with collective EU goals. Secondly, economic disparities. The economic differences between member states can make it difficult to implement uniform policies. Wealthier nations may be reluctant to support poorer ones financially. Addressing these disparities requires careful negotiation and often financial transfers or solidarity mechanisms. Thirdly, political populism. The rise of populist movements across Europe has added another layer of complexity. These movements often oppose further integration and advocate for national interests, making consensus building within the EU more challenging. Lastly, implementation challenges. Even if the reforms are agreed upon, implementing them across 27 diverse member states will be a complex task. Each country has its own legal and administrative systems, which can complicate the harmonization of new regulations and policies. Section 7. The road ahead. So, what can we expect in the coming years? The EU's future will largely depend on how these proposed reforms are received and implemented. If successful, these changes could lead to a more cohesive, resilient, and influential European Union. However, it won't be an easy road. The EU will need to navigate political disagreements, economic challenges, and public opinion to make these reforms a reality. Firstly, timelines and milestones. The EU has set ambitious timelines for these reforms. For instance, the banking reforms linked to Basel III are expected to be fully applicable by 2032, with transitional arrangements in place to help banks adapt. The migration reforms are slated for a final vote by mid-2024, with full implementation expected by 2026. Secondly, monitoring and evaluation. Continuous monitoring and evaluation will be crucial to ensure that the reforms achieve their intended goals. The EU will likely set up mechanisms to track progress and make adjustments as needed. Lastly, public engagement. Engaging with EU citizens will be key to garnering support for these reforms. Public consultations, informational campaigns, and transparent decision-making processes can help build trust and ensure that the reforms reflect the needs and aspirations of EU citizens. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Until next time, stay informed and stay curious.